How it got started was, I have kids, and when you look around, you see that there barely anything here for Caribbean kids to really understand their culture, or get into their culture and everything like that. So we said, you know what, let's start a little festival. So about 3 years ago, we started one. The first one was in a restaurant. And we had a decent, actually we had a good turnout. It was a smaller area, so it was a little cramped. But we had Jeffrey who did a reading earlier. He was at the first one. And we said, okay, you know what, let's see if we could expand it. We skipped 1 year. The second year I met Andrea. And Andrea had a passion for the Caribbean children, and Caribbean heritage like I did. So I said, you know what, I want to do this with you. So I found a good co-organizer, and we came to the library here, the Broward Library, and I said they'll host it. It's a Caribbean Heritage Month type event, so they'd host it. And that's really how it started out. It started out of a need, seeing that there needed to be programs out there for children of Caribbean heritage. That's really how it started out.
It's so funny. I was at an event where Jeffrey Philp was, and I was saying to him that although I love what I do at work, I would really love to be more involved in the community. And he mentioned that there was an event he had done a few years ago and how good it was. And I thought, wow, something like that would work. And later that same evening, I was at another event, made a similar comment, and it so happens it was Xavier, who happened to have been the person Jeffrey had been referring to, who had been the organizer. And I thought, well, if that isn't destiny, nothing is.
Well, I got started with the Anancy Festival with Xavier and Andrea about 3 years ago. And we wanted to give the children of Jamaica and the Caribbean a real connection with the islands, because that's one of the ways that we're trying to build their identity, to make them be, all of this goes back to people like Marcus Garvey, people like Malcolm X, people like Dr. King saying, you are somebody. So that's what we're trying to build because you can come here, you can come to this country and totally lose your whole roots where you came from, and we don't want the children to lose that.
I want the children to get right up. Come on, right here. All the little children. All right, I want a little. Miss Hassett, you can join in the middle. She's one of the younger ones. Thank you. Okay, this is called There's a Brown Girl in the Ring. La 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 la. All right. There's a brown girl in the ring. La 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 la. There's a brown girl in the ring. La 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 la. There's a brown girl in the ring. La 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 la. For she likes sugar and I like rum. There's a brown girl in the ring. La 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 la. There's a brown girl in the ring. La 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 la. There's a brown girl in the ring. La 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 la. For she likes sugar and I like rum. When you show me emotion, la 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 la. When you show me emotion, la 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 la. When you show me emotion, la 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 la. For she likes sugar and I like rum. And we tell the stories sometimes like what you heard this morning, and Nancy tell the story then. And when you finish the story, you say what? Jack man put me no shoes on. Because he is saying, whatever went wrong, don't blame me. You no choose none.
My father used to tell us these Anancy stories when I was growing up. Anancy the trickster. And what he'd do, he'd start one story, and to keep us engaged, he'd tell us half the story. And then he'd tell us the other half of the story the next day. It was an oral story. He'd add his little pieces in there. He'd improvise. My father was a performer. He was a singer. So he'd improvise and he'd do little things in it. So, I have great remembrance of these stories. He didn't read it from a book. It was all oral. It came all from his head. And it was passed down to him from his mom and his relatives. And I'm sure they weren't, educated folks. They didn't go to what, high school or anything like that. So the history was passed to them from their relatives. So it's an oral history that kept going and going. Now you have books, you know, and hopefully, you know, you've seen, we have films here. We have had 2 films that, you know, have been shown here, and I'm sure there are more films that are going to come along. But, you know, that's really where the memories start from me as a child growing up, my father telling me the stories.
Anancy is a trickster figure. And one of the things with trickster figures is they don't think anything is impossible, no matter how bad, big, violent you may be. The trickster figure says, I'm going to find a way to outsmart you, to make you realize that my strength comes not from brawn and muscle, my strength comes from my mind. And that again is another lesson we want to teach the children, that you don't have to be big and strong, you don't have to be the biggest, you know, like Brother Tiger. You can use your mind, you can use your wits, you can use your intelligence to overcome anything.
Brother Tiger stronger than me, Brother Tiger bigger than me, Brother Tiger have more land than me. How am I going to get this girl from Brother Tiger? And him sit down one day, him say, him tell the girl, him said, sure, you can't have Brother Tiger. Brother Tiger not nobody. Guess what? Brother Tiger was my father's old riding horse. And the girl said, true, Brother Nancy? He said, yes. My father and my great-grandfather used to ride Tiger. It was an old riding horse. The girl said, me not believe you. Brother Nancy said, if you don't believe me, sit down by the crossroad next week, Saturday evening at 4 o'clock. And I will show you, say, he was my grandfather and my father old riding horse.
Eventually, when I became a writer now, and I began to look at Anancy as a character, that is when the full lesson of what Anancy, you know, meant came back to me. And so, again, we were passing along these life lessons without thinking about it, which is why my books, I'm now conscious about, here is what I want to do. Here are the types of stories that I want to tell.
I came to the Anancy Festival because I had just completed a project of animated Anancy stories along with a coloring and activity book. I've done animation. That was my undergrad degree, and so that's my background. And you know, it just felt like a natural fit to do something as related to Jamaican culture. And so Anancy being already, you know, a character that everybody's experienced with, and not so much the younger generation, but you know, my generation may be older. And so I figured that would be the perfect avenue to start doing some cultural products. And so I'd started it 2 years ago and just you know, kept going at it after work, doing it, you know, on my own time, and finally finished it. And so I think it's a lot of people, when we explain the idea to them, they said, yeah, it just makes sense to take Anancy, that's one of the most common Caribbean well-known characters, and put him into a 21st century context. And so for me, hopefully it expands into other activities, hopefully other storytellers. The first book is just stories from Joan Andrew Hutchinson, but I mean, there's a wealth of other Anancy stories out there, so I'm sure that other storytellers hopefully will jump on and get that ball rolling. And the effect I hope it has on younger kids is that exposing them to their culture. I mean, a lot of the times the sports and the music are dominant because that's what's getting the most attention. And the other parts of our culture are sort of dying away or just not being as familiar as possible and as it could be. And so I think, you know, trying to tap Anancy, and maybe it's not just Anancy, you know, in Trinidad they have other, you know, duppy stories and things, like other characters that could be brought to life with this new medium.
Them good with everything, them good with English, them good with mathematics, because everything we do is sing it. So now we're going to learn to code by singing. All right.
As a lot of kids of Caribbean heritage are either born here or come here when they're very young, and so they're disconnected from the kind of Caribbean traditional, ritualized sort of folklore that we grow up with, those of us who were born there. So this is an opportunity for the kids who are here to just kind of have a little contact with either their parents or their family's culture, or this is not only for kids who are from the Caribbean. Non-Caribbean kids who are just interested in the Caribbean, this is perfect for them.
America is a great country. We love this country. It has done wonderful things for us. But just as how America has impacted Jamaica, Jamaica has also impacted America. In fact, I mean, you also look at how many people from the Caribbean have also impacted. People like Eric Holder, who is Attorney General. You have all of these people. Malcolm X, his parents were from the Caribbean. So you have all of this impact going back and forth. Marcus Garvey was from Jamaica. So you have all of this going back and forth. And what we want the children to realize is they are perhaps in a better position than we are, because they're drawing now from two different worlds, two different cultures, and they can in fact make it richer.
Well, you know, we like the concept of the festival being, it's really intimate. Right now it's an intimate festival where the performers are able to interact with the audience, okay? And I think that gives a sense of togetherness, a sense of togetherness. It really gives a sense of togetherness and connection. That's the word I was looking for, really connection. You know, it ties back to that oral history that I was talking about, where I'd have to tell you the story face to face. I'm not reading a book, I'm telling you the story face to face. So we know it's gotten big. I mean, you know, we had to grab more chairs tonight, okay? And we had to keep expanding it with chairs, and we came all the way in the back. And we understand at some point we may have to move to a bigger venue. We love this venue, but we may have to move to a bigger venue. But what we don't want to lose is that interaction that we have, because the African and Africa, that is really our connection. We don't have a history, and our history is an oral history, a history of touching, feeling, and you know, that's really our history. So to a sense, we're going to continue growing. Right now we're growing in location. You know, I'd mentioned earlier that we have Orlando that has contacted us. They want to do one simultaneously the same day. Jamaica is doing theirs today. Washington has contacted us and they want to do theirs. And you know, I was already speaking to someone else who says, listen, maybe there'll be an opportunity in Africa to do one in Africa at the same time. It's going to be a little tricky because of the time zone, so we may have to do a tape delay. But you know, so this thing is growing in a way that not maybe expanding here into more people coming here, but globally, okay, and throughout the United States. So that's where I see it growing, because definitely I know we're doing Orlando next year. Definitely I know we're doing Washington, because those people are serious about doing it. And we'll have Jamaica again next year. They had a great turnout today. And we'll have Florida. So we know there's 4 locations. Possibly could be 5 or 6 by next year. And that's where it's gonna grow, because I think there'll be a connection. And I foresee more interaction, where the children from here can ask the children in Jamaica or in another place, how do you deal with this? How do you know, your heritage and all that, you know, so that there can be a little bit more interaction as technology allows us to.